He ordered a gentle mail-order bride, but when a towering Apache woman rode up to his ranch instead, nothing in his quiet life would ever be the same. Henry Calder woke long before the sun, the same way he had for more than 60 years. His bones never let him forget his age. They announced it each morning with stiff protests as he swung his legs out of bed and pushed himself upright. The old ranch house creaked with him, wooden floors groaning as though waking up in sympathy. He shuffled to the kitchen, filled the kettle, and waited for the quiet whistle of steam. Breakfast was simple: eggs, toast, and the same jam he canned a decade ago. The chair across from him remained empty, as it had since his wife passed. He still caught himself glancing at it sometimes, expecting her warm smile or her habit of humming while she stirred sugar into her tea. But the chair never moved, and the silence never answered him back. After eating, Henry stepped outside to greet a ranch that had aged alongside him. Fences that once stood firm now leaned like tired old men. Sections of wire sagged, and some posts had fully surrendered to the desert wind. The cattle were fewer each year, and the ones that remained grazed slowly, ribs faintly visible beneath dusty hides. The barn roof carried a long crack of daylight where a storm had ripped off shingles last summer. Even the air felt quieter. No laughter, no conversation, just the crunch of his boots across dry earth. He fed the animals, checked the troughs, and repaired what small things he could, though his hands weren't as steady as before. By midday, he stopped to rest on the porch, staring over land he once cared for with pride. Now it felt like a place drifting towards stillness, waiting to fade with him. Inside, he sat at the kitchen table, sorting through old letters and magazines. He wasn't looking for anything in particular, just trying to distract himself from the weight of the long afternoon. As he flipped through a stack of envelopes, a small pamphlet slid free and fluttered onto the table. It was bright, almost cheerful compared to the dust-colored world around him. Companionship for senior ranchers. Let us connect you with someone kind. Henry stared at the words for a long time. His first reaction was embarrassment. He was too old, too set in his ways, too worn down to go chasing company like a lovesick boy. What would people think if they knew he needed something like this? What would his wife think? Kafi tu hilucker heze tu hef. But the longer he sat there, the more he felt the truth pressing against his heart. He hated the silence. He hated the empty chair. He hated the days that stretched on without a single human voice besides his own. Embarrassment was a sharp sting. The loneliness was a slow ache, and slow aches were harder to ignore. Finally, with a deep breath, he found a pen and unfolded the small application letter inside the pamphlet. His handwriting shook slightly, but he wrote with honesty, the kind that comes from a man with nothing left to pretend about. I'm not looking for youth or excitement. Just someone kind, someone who doesn't mind quiet mornings. If you can find a person like that, I'd be grateful. He signed his name, folded the letter, and sealed it before he could change his mind. When he placed it in the outgoing mailbox, he felt something lift inside him. Not hope exactly, but the faintest sense that his life might not stay empty forever. Across the state, under the shade of tall pines, Atsayana pressed a carving knife to a piece of wood, shaping the outline of a small coyote. Her hands were steady, shaped by years of craft, but her mind wandered. She lived among her community, yet she felt apart from it lately. Too many memories. Too many whispers of a past she was trying to leave behind. She needed a change, distance, quiet, something to help her breathe again. Her cousin arrived with a stack of newspapers and forms, excited about seasonal jobs opening up across Arizona. Without asking many details, he filled out an application he thought would fit her. Ranch work, decent pay, room included. He didn't mention the rest. Atsahina, tired and eager for a chance to start fresh, signed without reading too closely. She packed lightly, just clothes, tools, and the wooden figure she carved for comfort. While she prepared for her journey, Henry received a reply from the companionship service. They wrote with polite enthusiasm, confirming that someone had accepted his request and would arrive within a week. Henry felt nervous, almost foolish, but he cleaned the house anyway, swept floors, dusted shelves, even polished the old teapot his wife once loved. He didn't know who was coming, but he wanted to make a good impression. Two people living miles apart moved toward the same horizon, one seeking peace, the other companionship. Neither knew the mix-up coming their way. Neither knew how much their lives were about to change, and the desert wind carried both of them forward, step by quiet step, toward a meeting neither could have imagined. The week passed slowly for Henry, each day stretching longer than the last, as he waited for the arrival the agency promised. He tried to act as though he wasn't anticipating anything unusual, but the truth lingered in every small gesture he made. He swept the porch twice, though one sweep was more than enough. He dusted the mantel where his wife's framed photograph still stood, not because it needed cleaning, but because he felt she deserved to be part of whatever was about to come. He even laid out a fresh tablecloth on the dining table, smoothing the corners with more care than necessary. The ranch felt different during that week, still quiet, still lonely, but touched by a strange nervous energy that made Henry pause more often than usual. When he repaired a loose hinge on the barn door, he kept glancing toward the road. When he fed the cattle, he listened for the distant clatter of hooves. When he sat on the porch in the cool evenings, watching the sun drop behind the Red Canyon walls, he found himself wondering what kind of person might arrive. Maybe someone older like him, with wrinkles shaped by weather and years. Maybe someone gentle, someone who understood silence without being uncomfortable in it. He had no expectations beyond kindness, but the thought of sharing his home with another soul after so long made him feel like a boy waiting for his first guest. The day she arrived, the sky was cloudless, open and bright. The air shimmered with the kind of heat that made the dirt road look like a wavering ribbon stretching toward town. Henry stood on the porch, hand lifted to shield his eyes, scanning for the stagecoach he assumed would deliver his guest. He expected something ordinary. Dusty wheels, leather reins, a tired horse trotting in steady rhythm. Instead, he heard thunder. Not the rolling kind from the sky, but sharp, ground-vibrating hoofbeats. Single, powerful, and approaching fast. He stepped off the porch, squinting toward the distant heat haze, and at first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. A dark figure was cutting through the sunlight, tall and upright, riding a horse that moved with the confidence of something born in wild country. As the figure approached, the shape grew clearer. A woman, but nothing like he imagined. She rode with her back straight, her braid trailing behind her like a black rope in the desert wind. Her skin caught the sunlight with a warm bronze glow. She carried a woven satchel tied to her saddle and moved with the calm assurance of a person who trusted the land beneath her. Henry felt his breath catch. This was not the elderly companion the agency described. This was not the picture he'd held in his imagination. She was younger, stronger, and far more imposing than anyone he expected. Her horse slowed to a walk, then stopped a few feet from him. Dust drifted around them like a soft curtain before settling back onto the earth. The woman looked down at Henry with steady, unreadable eyes. "Are you Mr. Calder?" she asked, her voice calm, deep, and respectful. Henry swallowed. Yes. Yes, I'm Henry Calder." She nodded once, then dismounted with a smooth motion that showed she was no stranger to riding long distances. Standing beside her horse, she seemed even taller than he first thought, her height almost intimidating. But her expression held no harshness, only patience. "My name is Atsahina," she said. "I was told you needed help. Seasonal work. Room provided." Henry blinked. The words hit him in a strange, disorienting way. "Seasonal work?" "Yes," she replied simply. "My cousin received notice. He told me you had a job open on the ranch." A heavy silence stretched between them. Henry felt the confusion, not his stomach. "I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding," he said carefully. "I wasn't hiring ranch hands. I sent a letter to a companionship agency. They said they were sending someone to stay with me." Atsahina's brow tightened. Her eyes shifted slightly, troubled but not angry. "A companion agency?" she repeated slowly, as though testing the unfamiliar words. "That is not what I agreed to." "I see that now," Henry said softly. They stood facing each other in the long hush of the desert. A light breeze passed between them, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush. The misunderstanding settled into Henry's chest with a weight that felt both embarrassing and strangely sad. He had waited all week for someone who didn't exist, while the woman standing before him had traveled miles under the belief she was coming for honest work. Atsahina glanced toward the house, then back at him. "If this was a mistake," she said, "I understand if you cannot offer the job after all." Her quiet dignity struck Henry harder than anything else. She wasn't angry. She wasn't demanding explanations. She simply stood with calm resolve, as though ready to turn back into the desert without complaint. "You rode all this way," Henry said. "The sun's still high. I can't just send you off into the heat. Please, come inside. Rest. Have water. We can talk it through." Atsahina studied his face for a moment, then nodded once. "Thank you," she said. Henry led her toward the house, walking slowly so she could tie her horse at the post and gather her satchel. He held the front door open as she stepped inside. The moment she crossed the threshold, the ranch house felt different, less empty, less still. Her presence filled the space in a way that made Henry suddenly aware of the dust on the shelves and the worn patches in the rug. He guided her to the kitchen, where the air was cooler. She sat at the table with quiet grace, placing her satchel beside her feet. Henry filled a glass with cold water from the jug and set it before her. "Thank you," she said again, drinking slowly. Henry sat across from her, hands clasped together, unsure how to begin. "I'm sorry about the confusion," he said. "I truly didn't know someone else applied to anything I posted. I only meant to find companionship. I didn't mean for it to affect anyone else's plans." Atsahina nodded. "It is not your fault. My cousin sends my applications. He must have mistaken your posting for a job." She paused. "I needed a place to start over, so I agreed without asking enough questions." Her honesty carried a quiet strength. Henry felt a gentle wave of empathy rise within him. "Well," he said carefully, "if you need a place to rest until we sort this out, you're welcome here." She looked at him directly then, her eyes sharp but not unkind. "I don't want to cause trouble." "You're not," Henry said. "Trouble would be turning you back into the desert with nothing but the clothes on your back." She allowed a small breath of acceptance and sat a little more comfortably in her chair. The awkwardness between them softened. Henry offered her a plate of biscuits he baked that morning, and she accepted one with quiet gratitude. It was only a few minutes of shared silence, yet it felt like a bridge forming, shaky, uncertain, but real. When she finished eating, Henry showed her the guest room. She walked through the doorway slowly, taking in the simple bed, the small dresser, and the window that overlooked the grazing fields. "This is more than enough," she said. Henry nodded and left her to settle in. As he stepped back into the hallway, he felt a strange mix of relief and nervousness. The house, once still and empty, now held another heartbeat. He wasn't sure what the arrangement would become, nor how long she would stay, but for the first time in years, he felt the quiet beginning to shift. Outside, the desert sun began its slow descent beyond the hills. Atsahina unpacked her few belongings with careful movements, placing them neatly in the dresser drawers. Henry returned to the porch and sat down heavily, gazing at the road where she had appeared like a figure out of some old story. What neither of them knew was that this unexpected crossing, born from a single mistaken letter, was only the first step toward the bond that would change both of their lives far more deeply than either one could imagine. Morning sunlight crept across the wooden floorboards of the guest room long before Atsahina opened her eyes. She had slept lightly, not because the bed was uncomfortable. It was soft in a way she wasn't used to, but because she was in a stranger's home, surrounded by sounds she did not yet recognize. The old ranch house sighed gently at night, beams settling, screen doors rattling faintly when the wind swept over the fields. She had grown up listening to the whisper of pine trees, the murmur of river water, the distant call of coyotes. The quiet here was different, wide open, unfamiliar, almost too large. Still, when she swung her legs over the bed and stood, she felt lighter than she had in months. She dressed, tied her hair back with a simple cord, and stepped into the hallway. The air smelled faintly of coffee. She followed the scent until she reached the kitchen, where Henry stood at the stove, poking at something in a cast-iron pan with cautious concentration. He jumped slightly when he noticed her. "Oh, good morning," he said. "Didn't hear you come in. I tend to walk quietly," she replied. "I'm learning that," he said, then gave a small chuckle. "I hope you don't mind eggs and biscuits. It's what I'm best at, though. Best might be generous." Atsahina approached the table, noticing he had set 2 plates out, one in front of his usual chair and another across from him. Something about the simple gesture struck her as unexpectedly kind. She sat down, folding her hands neatly in her lap. Henry served breakfast, setting the warm plate in front of her. She nodded her thanks and ate slowly, appreciating the warmth of the meal more than she expected. She was used to preparing her own food quickly, often eating while working. Sitting at a kitchen table felt almost ceremonial. Henry wasn't much of a talker while eating, but he was observant. He kept glancing at her, trying not to stare, attempting conversation in small, cautious doses. She answered him with honesty and brief sentences, never rude, simply reserved. For 2 people who knew almost nothing about each other, the silence between them somehow felt gentle. After breakfast, Atsahina stood and gathered the dishes, washing them without asking. Henry tried to protest, insisting she was a guest, but she refused with quiet determination. "You gave me a room," she said. "I can wash a plate." Henry had no argument for that. They stepped outside together afterward, though not intentionally. He went to check the fences. She walked toward the barn out of habit. She always preferred being near structures that needed tending. Without asking permission, she pushed open the barn door and scanned the interior. Dust coated the beams. Several boards had come loose. A hinge was hanging crooked on the far stall. Nothing disastrous, but enough to make her fingers itch for tools. Henry peered in from the doorway. "Something wrong?" "It needs work," she said simply. "Oh, I know," he answered with a sigh. "I haven't had the strength to keep up with everything." "I can fix some of it," she said. Henry hesitated, unsure if he should let a guest handle heavy work. But before he could reply, she had already rolled up her sleeves and begun examining a loose board. He watched for a moment, then stepped closer. "There are tools in the shed out back," he said. "I can show you." Together they walked to the shed, Henry moving slowly, Atsahina striding with quiet purpose. When they reached the door, he unlocked it and swung it open. Tools hung from hooks, some rusted, some still useful. She selected a hammer and a handful of nails, testing the hammer's weight with a small nod of approval. Henry had never seen anyone assess tools with such focused efficiency. When they returned to the barn, she climbed a small ladder and began securing the board with steady, practiced swings. Henry stood below, feeling oddly useless but strangely proud to watch someone treat the ranch as though its condition mattered. "You've done this kind of work before?" he asked. "All the time," she answered without looking down. "I like fixing things. They stay fixed longer than people do." That statement hung in the air, with a quiet ache neither of them addressed. For the first hour, Henry hovered nearby, offering help whenever he thought she needed it, though she never did. Eventually he realized he was getting in the way more than contributing, so he stepped back and began tending to easier chores. But every so often he glanced up from his task to see her moving confidently across the barn beams, handling repairs with a steady rhythm that made the old wooden structure feel alive again. By midday, the sun burned overhead, and the heat pressed against the ranch like a heavy blanket. Atsahina stepped out of the barn with dust on her clothes and a faint sheen of sweat across her forehead. Henry handed her a jar of cold water without a word. She drank deeply, then lowered the jar and exhaled. "You work hard," Henry said. "I work better when my mind is full," she replied. He nodded, understanding without needing an explanation. They rested on the porch for a while, Atsahina watching the horizon, Henry watching her with cautious curiosity. Her presence felt grounding, steady, like the land itself. He hadn't realized how long it had been since he'd shared quiet time with another person. When afternoon shadows stretched long and thin, Atsahina noticed Henry limping more than usual. She stepped closer and asked, "Your leg, is it always like that?" Henry looked down, almost embarrassed. "Old injury. Some days are worse than others. You should not walk the fence lines alone," she said. "I've managed this long." That does not mean it was wise. Her straightforward tone startled him, but he didn't feel offended. Instead, he felt seen in a way he hadn't been in years. They ate dinner together again, simple stew this time, and afterward, Henry stepped onto the porch to play his harmonica. He didn't play for others. He'd only ever played for his wife. But tonight, he felt the urge to bring the instrument to his lips, breathing life into the familiar notes. The melody drifted into the evening air, soft and nostalgic. Atsahina stood in the doorway, listening with stillness that resembled reverence. She didn't interrupt, didn't speak. She simply let the music settle into the quiet spaces around them. When the song ended, Henry lowered the harmonica, almost sheepish. "Sorry," he murmured. "It's an old habit." "It sounds like memories," she said gently. He nodded. "It does." The next morning followed a similar rhythm. Quiet breakfast, shared chores, soft conversations that revealed small pieces of their lives. Henry learned that Atsahina carved wooden animals, not for decoration, but to calm her thoughts. She learned that Henry kept every letter his wife ever wrote him in a small tin box beneath the bed. They didn't exchange their whole histories, just fragments. But even fragments can carry great weight. Later that day, a small commotion broke out near the fence line. One of the calves had wandered between sagging wires and into the brush. Henry moved quickly but unsteadily, and before he could take more than a few steps, Atsahina was already running across the field with swift, powerful strides. She reached the calf, knelt to guide it gently, whispered something soothing, and nudged it back through the gap. By the time Henry arrived, breathless, she was already examining the broken wire. "This needs to be fixed today," she said. "I know," Henry replied. "I've been meaning to." "I will help," she interrupted. Together they repaired the fence, their hands moving in parallel rhythm. For the first time, they worked not as a guest and a host, but as two people sharing responsibility for the same patch of land. When they finished, Henry found himself smiling without meaning to. In the evening, as the sky turned orange and purple over the desert, Atsahina sat on the porch steps, carving a small figure. Henry sat in his usual chair, watching her hands shape the wood into something recognizable. Ears, a tail, the curve of a small coyote. She didn't speak while she carved, and he didn't interrupt. When she finished, she set the figure on the railing beside him. "For your porch," she said simply. He picked it up gently, running his fingers along the smooth edges. "It's beautiful," he said. "Thank you." She nodded once. Something unspoken passed between them then. A quiet acknowledgement that they were beginning to understand each other, beginning to settle into a rhythm neither had expected, beginning to share a companionship they had not sought, but somehow needed. The ranch felt less empty now, less silent. The lonely spaces in Henry's home and in Atsahina's heart had started to shift, filling slowly with the steady presence of another person. They did not call it friendship yet. They did not name the warmth growing between them, but something had begun, something neither of them could deny. And the desert wind seemed to carry that quiet beginning across the wide open land. Summer storms in northern Arizona were unpredictable. Some arrived quietly, no more threatening than a cool whisper of wind sweeping across the plains. Others came like beasts, unannounced, violent and unstoppable. Henry Calder had known them all during his decades on the ranch, yet even with experience, he never underestimated the sky when it began to shift. The desert had its own language, one that spoke through heat, wind, and the uneasy silence animals carried in their bodies when something dangerous was coming. For a few days, subtle warnings had drifted across the horizon. Clouds formed in distant patches, merging slowly into thickening masses. The heat grew heavier, sticking to the skin, clinging to clothing. The cattle grew restless, their ears flicking at sounds that hadn't yet arrived. Yet despite the tension in the air, Henry continued working the ranch with the quiet persistence he carried everywhere he went. Atsahina noticed the signs as well. She climbed up to the roof one afternoon to secure loose shingles and paused to look toward the gathering clouds. The wind tugged at her braid, as if urging her to pay attention. "A storm is coming," she said later while sweeping dust from the barn floor. Henry nodded. "I've been expecting one." They hit hard around this time of summer. "You should not walk the ranch alone tomorrow," she said. "If the storm breaks overhead, the ground will flood." "I'll be careful," Henry replied. "I just need to check the south fence line. Some wire snapped again." "You can check it today," she insisted. "Today, my leg's giving me trouble," he answered with a forced smile. "It'll be better tomorrow." Her eyes narrowed slightly with concern, but she did not argue further. Instead, she helped him secure the barn doors and stack loose boards that might fly during strong winds. Henry tried to match her speed, but age refused to be ignored. Atsahina took on the heavier tasks without complaint, her movements fluid and efficient. When thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, she paused and glanced toward the darkening horizon. "That storm is close," she murmured. "We'll be fine," Henry said, though a faint worry pressed against his ribs. By the time dusk settled, the air felt thick, tense, charged with the kind of energy that made a person instinctively listen more carefully. Atsahina cooked dinner quietly, glancing out the window often. Henry sat at the table polishing his harmonica, though he didn't intend to play. He was too distracted by the uneasy pulse of the night. Lightning flickered far beyond the hills, brief, silent flashes like warning signals. The wind slipped under the doorframe, carrying the smell of rain that had not yet fallen. They ate together in the dim kitchen, each bite accompanied by distant grumbles of thunder. "You should rest," Atsahina said gently when Henry stood too quickly and winced at the strain on his leg. "I'm all right," he insisted, forcing a lighter tone than he felt. "Just stiff from sitting." He walked out onto the porch, leaning on the railing as the purple-gray sky swallowed the last slivers of daylight. Atsahina joined him quietly, standing beside him with her arms folded. They watched the storm build itself in the distance, layer by layer, until the clouds swelled into a dark, towering mass. Henry exhaled slowly. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "I'll fix that fence before the worst of it reaches us." Atsahina's expression tightened. "The cattle can survive one broken fence." "Your body cannot survive a storm alone, Henry." "I'm not helpless," he said gently. "I did not say you were," she answered. "But even strong men have been swept away in summer floods. The ground becomes water. The water becomes mud. Mud becomes a trap." He heard something deeper beneath her words. Fear, memory, or perhaps both. But before he could ask, a sharp flash of lightning illuminated the entire sky. The following thunder arrived seconds later, loud enough to rattle the windows. Atsahina took a slow breath. "It is starting." Rain had not yet touched the ranch, but the storm crawled closer throughout the night. Henry tossed in his bed, unable to sleep, listening to the creaks of the house and the shifting wind. Atsahina slept in the guest room, though she woke several times as well, alert to the sky's warnings. By dawn, the storm had moved over the hills, but had not yet reached them. The air felt strangely cold, a sign that the clouds overhead were heavy with water. Henry rose early, limping slightly as he dressed. When he stepped outside, Atsahina was already up, tying her hair back with swift movements. "You should not go," she said, stepping in front of him. "It'll be quick," Henry replied, "just checking the fence before the storm hits. I know this ranch better than anyone." He began walking toward the south field. She followed him several steps, then stopped when she realized he wouldn't turn back. The urge to go with him tugged hard at her chest, but she stayed, though uneasily. Henry waved a hand without looking back. "I'll be fine," he called. "An old man like me knows how to outrun a bit of rain." She didn't laugh. The first raindrops fell before Henry reached the broken fence. They were soft, scattered, harmless. But desert storms never stayed gentle for long. By the time he reached the posts, the sky had darkened fully. Wind whipped across the prairie. The cattle bellowed in distant unease. Henry leaned down to check the wire, gripping it with careful fingers, but the moisture in the air made his hands slick, and the uneven ground made balance difficult. Within minutes, rain began to fall in sheets. Henry tried to finish the repair quickly. He twisted the wire, driving a nail into the post, but his injured leg slipped on the wet mud forming beneath him. He stumbled, planted his cane, and forced himself upright. But the wind grew stronger. Rain hammered against him, soaking his clothes, blurring his vision. The ground trembled with the force of distant thunder. He attempted to take a step back toward the house, but his boots sank into a patch of mud, softened by the sudden torrent. His leg gave out beneath him. He fell hard onto the ground, pain shooting through his hip and thigh. The wind sucked the breath from his chest. He tried to push himself up, but the mud clung stubbornly, pulling at him like a living thing. Water pooled around him, rising quickly as the storm unleashed its full fury. Meanwhile, back at the ranch house, Atsahina stood near the window, watching the rain pound the earth outside. Something inside her twisted sharply. She felt the wrongness settle deep in her bones. Henry should have been back by now. He should have been walking across the field, silhouetted by the gray sky. But the land was empty. She grabbed her coat, stepped out into the rain, and sprinted across the field with the instinct of someone who had spent her life reading storms like maps. Water drenched her instantly, but she paid no attention. Her boots sank into mud, but she tore free each time. Wind shoved against her, but she moved forward with fierce determination. The further she ran, the clearer the danger became. The ground was turning into rivers. Thin streams at first, then thicker flows carving paths through the earth. She called Henry's name, but the wind swallowed her voice. Lightning cracked, illuminating the field in blinding light. She paused only to scan the land, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. Then she saw it. A dark shape slumped near the fence line. She ran harder. When she reached him, Henry was half submerged in muddy water, struggling weakly to push himself upright. Relief and fear collided inside her chest. She knelt beside him, lifting his shoulders, brushing rain from his face. "Henry," she said urgently, "look at me." He blinked, dazed, pain etched into every line of his expression. "I slipped," he murmured. "You should not have come alone," she said, her voice breaking despite her effort to remain calm. Lightning flashed again, and she knew they had no time. The muddy water was rising quickly. Without hesitation, she slipped her arms beneath him and lifted him to his feet. He tried to protest, embarrassed, stubborn, overwhelmed, but she didn't listen. Her grip was steady, firm, protective. She guided him slowly at first, then faster as the ground threatened to collapse beneath them. Each step was a battle against wind and water, but she didn't falter. Henry leaned on her, breath ragged, unable to do more than cling to her strength. When they reached the house, the storm crashed fully overhead. Thunder roared, rain slammed against the roof. Inside the kitchen, she lowered him into a chair and knelt beside him, checking his leg gently. "You could have been swept away," she said, her voice cold with fear she was only now allowing herself to feel. "I didn't think," Henry began. "I know," she cut in softly, "but I thought." Their eyes met, his filled with gratitude and shame, hers with worry and exhausted relief. The lantern flickered on the table, casting warm light across their wet clothes and muddy boots. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the house, a different storm was settling into something quiet, something honest. Henry reached for her hand with trembling fingers. "You saved my life," he said. She shook her head gently. "I did what anyone should do." "No," Henry whispered. "You did what someone who cares would do." Atsahina's breath caught. The storm outside roared louder, but inside the small kitchen, the world had narrowed to the soft space between them. In that fragile moment, something deep and unspoken passed between them. Recognition, fear, hope, and a tenderness neither had expected. The storm had nearly taken him, but it had also revealed something neither of them could deny. The storm passed in the hours just before dawn, leaving the world washed and trembling in silence. Rainwater clung to the windows in long streaks, still dripping from the eaves in steady taps that echoed through the early morning stillness. The sky, usually bright and fierce at sunrise, was soft and pale, an exhausted horizon after a long night of fury. The air smelled of wet earth, sagebrush, and the cold breath of the desert's relief. Inside the ranch house, Henry lay awake in his room, staring at the ceiling. Every bone in his body ached. His leg throbbed with a deep, slow pain that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. But none of that troubled him as much as the memory of the night before. The mud swallowing his feet, the storm shaking the sky, and Atsahina his arms lifting him with fierce determination. He could still feel her grip on him, steady as stone, warm despite the freezing rain. He could still hear the tremor in her voice when she told him he could have been swept away. He hadn't seen anyone look at him with that much fear in a very long time, and perhaps even longer since someone had looked at him with that much care. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing out slowly. He wasn't sure what frightened him more, the storm that had nearly taken him, or the feelings rising in him afterward. In the kitchen, Atsahina moved quietly, as though trying not to disturb the fragile peace the morning carried. She boiled water, sliced a piece of bread, and set things on the table with deliberate calm. Her movements were steady, but her thoughts were not. She replayed the night again and again, the moment she saw him collapsed in the mud, the surge of panic that nearly crushed her chest, the desperation that pushed her legs harder than they had ever moved before. She had known fear before, but not like this, not the kind that made her imagine losing someone she cared about before she even had the chance to understand what that care meant. When Henry finally stepped into the kitchen, leaning heavily on his cane, she turned toward him immediately. Her eyes traveled over him, checking his posture, his breathing, the way he held his leg. It was instinctive, almost automatic. Henry stopped in the doorway, meeting her gaze, and for a moment neither spoke. "You should still be resting," she said softly. "I've done enough resting," Henry replied, though his voice lacked the firmness he wanted it to have. "Just needed to move a bit." "You pushed too hard yesterday," she said. "Your body is telling you the truth now." "I know," he admitted. "You don't have to worry so much." She looked at him then, really looked, and he realized how deeply last night had shaken her. "I will worry," she said. "You gave me a reason to." He didn't know what to say. Her honesty struck something inside him, opening a space that had been locked for years. He walked slowly to the table, and she moved to help him sit, her hands steady but gentle. The moment he was settled, she stepped back, unsure if she had overstepped. Henry reached out, brushing his fingers slightly against her wrist in silent reassurance. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything." "You do not have to thank me," she replied. "I do," he insisted. "I'm alive because of you." Her eyes softened. Though she didn't smile, she rarely smiled. But Henry had learned that with her, silence was often a deeper expression than words. They ate breakfast quietly. Henry took small bites, still tired. Atsahina pushed food around her plate more than she ate it, her thoughts far away. When they finished, she stood and began cleaning, her movements a little too stiff, a little too careful. Henry watched her for a long moment, the weight of unspoken things filling the room. "Atsahina," he said eventually. She paused, hands resting on the edge of the sink. "Sit for a moment." Reluctantly, she turned and sat across from him. He didn't know exactly how to begin, so he took a breath and let the words come the only way he knew, plain and honest, the way he'd always lived his life. "I was foolish yesterday," he said. "You were right. I shouldn't have gone out there alone." She didn't respond, but her expression softened. "I've been alone for so long," he continued. "I forget what it means to let someone help me. I forget that another person might care." Her eyes flickered, revealing something fragile beneath her steady exterior. "You've been here only a short time," Henry said, "but this place, my home, it feels different with you in it. Better, warmer." Atsahina lowered her gaze, unsure how to respond. She had not expected confession, not from him, not today. Her hands curled gently against the table, as though trying to anchor herself. "I don't want you thinking you have to stay because of last night," Henry said quietly. "And I don't want you thinking this house traps you. You came here by mistake, and I'd never hold you to something you didn't choose." The word choose lingered heavily between them. Atsahina lifted her eyes. "You think I am trapped?" "No," Henry said, shaking his head. "But I think you've lived through things that made you used to going where you're told, doing what others decide. I don't want to be another decision made for you." The stillness in her face fractured slightly. Her mouth trembled before she steadied it. For a woman built of silence and control, vulnerability came like a thin, breaking whisper. "I came here to start over," she said. "I did not know what I would find." I did not expect anything good to come of this mistake." Henry swallowed, feeling his heart tighten. "But then," she continued, "this house became quiet in a way that did not hurt. This land felt familiar, even though it is not my home. And you—" She stopped, searching for the right words. "You look at me like I am not a burden." "You're not," Henry whispered. "You make me feel that I belong somewhere." She exhaled shakily. "I have not felt that in a long time." Henry's chest ached. He reached across the table, slowly, as if afraid she might pull away. She didn't. His hand rested over hers, warm, light, respectful. "You do belong," he said. "At least you belong here if you want to." Atsahina looked down at their joined hands, then up at him with an expression he couldn't quite name. Soft, searching, almost afraid. "Henry," she said quietly, "why are you telling me this?" He took a moment to steady himself. He was not a man prone to bold statements. He had lived most of his life with gentle words and quiet habits. But some truths could not live in silence. "Because last night," he said softly, "when you came for me in that storm, I realized how afraid I was of not seeing you again. And I realized how deeply I've come to care for you. More than I expected. More than I know how to explain." Atsahina's breath trembled. She stared at him, and for a long moment the world seemed to narrow to the space between their eyes. "I don't want you to go," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Not because a letter brought you here, but because you choose to stay." The choice hung between them like a fragile bridge. Atsahina's eyes glistened, not with tears, but with a depth of emotion she rarely allowed to surface. She wanted peace. She wanted belonging. And here, in this quiet kitchen, with this gentle old man who looked at her with such steady warmth, she felt something she had nearly forgotten existed. Slowly, deliberately, she turned her hand beneath his and laced her fingers with his own. "I choose to stay," she said. The world outside the window was still battered from the storm, but inside the house, something settled into place. A calm, steady truth, warm as sunlight rising after a dark night. Later that day, while Henry rested, Atsahina stepped outside to survey the storm damage. The barn roof had held. The fences needed attention, but nothing beyond repair. The land, though shaken, would recover. And so would they. In the days that followed, they rebuilt the ranch together. She lifted heavy boards while he guided from the ground. He played harmonica in the evenings, and she carved figures that soon lined the windowsills. Coyotes, owls, deer, and horses, each one carved with quiet devotion. Neighbors who rarely visited began to notice the changes. The ranch looked cared for. The porch looked brighter. Henry walked with a new steadiness, even on days when his leg ached. And Atsahina's presence, strong, calm, constant, seemed to breathe life into the land itself. They never rushed anything. They didn't need to. Their companionship grew naturally, shaped by shared work, shared silences, and shared nights watching the sky shift from fire to starlight. One evening, weeks after the storm, Henry sat on the porch with Atsahina beside him. The carved coyote she'd given him the first week sat on the railing, watching the horizon with wooden eyes. Henry looked at her, then at the land stretching before them. "I thought I would finish my life alone," he said quietly. "I didn't expect a second chance at anything." She leaned back slightly, letting the warm evening breeze wash over her. "Sometimes," she said, "the desert gives back what it takes." Henry smiled at that, a small, genuine smile that reached his eyes. He placed his hand over hers, gentle, grateful. They sat together in the fading light, two people who had found each other not by plan, not by destiny, but by a mistake that turned into a miracle. The storm had changed everything, and from its destruction, something new, quiet, steady, and beautiful had begun. In the vast silence of the desert, where storms rise and fade like forgotten memories, two souls discovered that love is not bound by age, origin, or expectations. Henry and Atsahina did not find each other through promises or plans, but through courage, compassion, and the gentle bravery of choosing one another. Their story reminds us that new beginnings can appear when we least expect them. arriving not in the form we imagined, but in the form we truly need. And sometimes, the greatest miracles are born from life's smallest mistakes. If stories like this touch your heart, then saddle up and subscribe to Wild West Love Chronicles, your campfire home for unexpected romance, frontier drama, and unforgettable tales of the human spirit. Don't miss the next story that's waiting just over the horizon.